Yum, yum!
Modo's modeling tools offer a lot of freedom and flexibility in the way you approach your modeling tasks. And one of the best things about this is the fact that there are so many different ways that you can work on your models. You can use Mesh Fusion to use live interactive Booleans. It has wonderful subdivision surface and polygonal modeling tools. You have fall-offs, action centers, and all sorts of other great things that will make your modeling job easier. But perhaps the best part is the fact that you can mix and match those parts together so that you can come up with your own best way to approach whatever modeling task you have at hand. In this lesson, we're going to be taking this model, this character, and turning it into an action figure by placing flexible poseable joints so that you could easily set this up either as individual pieces for 3D printing and prototyping, or so that you could set up a rig on it and very simply handle the posing of this character as you would handle any kind of poseable doll or action figure. So we're going to cover a bit of polygonal and subdivision surface modeling. We're going to cover Mesh Fusion, and we're even going to look at a little bit of procedural modeling that will help us get where we need to go faster. So there's a lot to cover. Let's get started. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do with this model is to give myself a little bit of a hand in the visualization process, because right now this character is fully textured and has a lot of materials on it that can get in the way when we're trying to look at the mesh itself. So what I'm going to do is hop over to my shader tree and select the base shader, because we're going to drop something in right underneath. And I'm just going to go to Add Layer, Material, and put in a blank material underneath the base shader, but on top of all of these imported shaders, which has all of the shaders that came in with this model when I imported it. Now, as a side note, if you want to work with something a little bit less complex, you could take any of the Modo stock content human figures and do pretty much the same process. In this case, I have a character that's broken up into several pieces. You can see that the main body of the character, the feet and the upper body down to the end of the sleeves, is one model piece. Then the hands are two separate pieces, so the kind of glove hand pieces and the hands themselves are each separate pieces. And then the head is also a separate piece, which is based off of some very simply retopologized scan data, which I can show you here. If we hide the helmet. And then it's got a helmet and a backpack that are also individual pieces. And the idea here would be that some of the extra pieces, like the backpack and the helmet and even the gloves, could be secondary pieces that could be removed and put back on if you would like. But we're just going to be setting up the poseable joints on the main body itself. So the character body with the hands and the head. Mesh Fusion by itself will allow you a lot of really creative and flexible ways to dice up a model and to cut away pieces so that you can get exactly what you want. In the case of something like a hinge, it's really easy to subtract some pieces from one part and subtract other pieces from another part. Say two parts of the arm, for example, we could subtract out from the middle to create a hinge, and that's really easy to do. And you could do it with some compound pieces and things like that. But one way that Modo makes this much easier is if you leverage the regular subdivision surface tools in order to simplify the work that you're doing in Mesh Fusion. So what we're going to look at here is creating some simple joints, then using those joints or the pieces of the joints as Mesh Fusion objects in order to cut apart this object. We're going to take different pieces of the character and slice them apart so that we have kind of floating pieces, perhaps the lower arm and the upper arm, and then the torso will be separate pieces. The leg will be one piece, and then the head, which is already separate, will be cut into a couple of separate pieces so that we can use Mesh Fusion a little bit more easily. Now, keep in mind that you could do this entirely inside of Mesh Fusion, but the idea here is to create a more mixed style of modeling that will allow you to leverage the power of all of the separate pieces of Modo's modeling interface. So let's start by looking at the pieces that I have already built here. So if we look in this Fusion Hinge folder, you can see that we have several different pieces. We have a pin cut, a center cut, and here, let's go ahead and make these all visible as we go. So I'm going to press the O key, and on my inactive meshes, I'm going to right now just set them to inactive invisible. That way, only the ones I select will show up. So here's our pin cut. So this will be used to cut a pin hole through one of the pieces. We have a center cut, which will cut out the middle. We've got two halves of a C, so C1 and C2. Those will be used to round off the joints. And then we have an outer cut, which is basically the outside portions of the center cut. So you can see there's the center cut with the outer cut. And then we have a pin by itself that we'll use to insert back in the middle. So you get the feel that one of the halves, we're going to start here with the elbow joint. So one half of the elbow will have a pin that will slot through the other half of the elbow, or the other half of the arm. So what we're going to be looking at here is essentially doing something like taking our, let's see, our C1 and our center cut along with our pin cut, and we'll be using these to subtract from one side of the mesh. And then we'll be taking our outer cut and our other half of our C to subtract from the other half. That way we will have matching up rounded pieces, and we can easily bend the joints on this character. And then we're going to take this pin, and we could either use Mesh Fusion to place this pin, or we could just line it up and place it. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and bring our character back in, and what we'll see here, if we make our inactive meshes back to visible again, what we'll see is that this is a really large piece, and that's okay because we've got this just at one scale, but if we want to use this in multiple places, we're going to be duplicating it and moving it around anyway. So let's start just by creating a duplicate of this entire fusion hinge, and then we'll scale it and move it up into place at the elbow joint where we would want this elbow to bend. So let's take fusion hinge. I'm going to right click and choose duplicate and duplicate hierarchy. That way I get everything inside of the folder as well. And now we're going to make sure that we're in item mode because I want to move the entire group. I don't want to be in polygon mode because then I'm going to be offsetting my centers. And I just want to move the entire group here. So I'm going to start just by rotating this so that it roughly matches the angle of the arm. So we'll go something like that. And then I can also move it up close to being in place. That way I can align this a little bit better. And that looks just about right on alignment. And then I want to make sure that I have these C's set up so where they can cut off the end of the elbow section. So I think something like that works pretty well. All right, so now I'm going to finish moving this right into place, and then we'll go in and in polygon mode, we'll scale the whole thing down with all of the individual layers being scaled proportionally. So let's go ahead and open up Fusion Hinge, and now I'm going to select all of the individual layers, make sure that I'm now in polygon mode, and just use my scale tool. I'll set my action center to selection so that it lines up with what we've got selected here. And then I'm just going to uniformly scale the whole thing down. And what I'm looking for is something that encompasses the entire elbow without being too large. So you can see right now that's getting close, but we're going to need to adjust the position a little bit. So I'm going to pull it back maybe to right here. And then let's pull it up just a little bit. And again, we want to make sure that we don't have any of the elbow joint poking through either here or here. Okay, I think that's going to work great. So the next thing that we need to do is actually set up and get the individual pieces of our arm. So what I'm going to do, and the way that I'm going to divide this up, is I'm going to take a piece of the lower part of the arm here up through just past the halfway point here, so it's overlapping this C cut here. That way this Mesh Fusion object will round it off. And then I'm going to take a version of the arm and just get the upper arm from about a similar location down here all the way up to the shoulder area. And then we'll actually use another Mesh Fusion object here to create kind of a ball socket that will attach to the top of the arm and also cut away from the inside of the torso. And that way we'll have a matching socket where the arm will fit into the torso. All right, so I'm going to start just by selecting the entire torso here. Actually, here, I take it back. Let's go ahead and I'm going to zoom in here. We'll see that this is actually open-ended on the inside, so we're going to end up capping that off. But what I'm going to do is just loop select this and just use Shift and the up arrow until I get pretty much to the shoulder. And I think that's probably going to be enough. So let's go ahead and copy that. And now I'm going to start making a new group of mesh items here. So I'm going to press N to get a new mesh item, and I'll call this arm upper, and I'll paste that whole arm in. All right, and now I can go ahead and hide the rest of the character so it's not in the way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a point probably right about here. And I'm going to hold Shift and the closed bracket, and it will select everything kind of south of here. And actually, before I cut this off, what I'm going to do is right-click on this arm upper and duplicate it. So again, we'll go to duplicate and duplicate. And then I'm going to make this one arm lower. All right, so now we can hide that one for a moment. And now we'll go ahead and select this here, shift and the close bracket, and then shift up arrow to get to right here. And I'm going to go ahead and just cut that off on this one. So what I need to do is I need to close off the mesh both here and up here, so we end up with essentially an airtight mesh. Now, with the newer version of Mesh Fusion that's in Modo 10, it's less picky about having open-ended meshes. It's also less picky about triangles and n-gons, but we're going to try our best to help it out by keeping those things limited as much as we can. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this loop here, and I can see that this is 8 edges. So I'm going to bridge essentially 3 edges on one side with a gap, and then 3 edges on the other. So I'm just going to deselect an edge here, count 1, 2, 3 edges, and deselect an edge here. So now I have 6 edges selected, and it's 3 over here and 3 over here. And now I can just simply use the bridge tool and click, and we've got our arm created here. Now all I have to do is just do a little bit of arranging to kind of nestle these pieces back inside of the fusion object. So let's get that one there, and I think I can just go with this vertex here, and I'm just going to push it back and in. And there we go. That's all we're looking for, is that it's hidden inside of there. That way when we subtract this piece from here, it's going to round it off really nicely. All right, so let's do the same thing up here at the top. So I'm going to select this bit here in edges, and we're still 8 edges here, so we're going to do the same thing. And I'm going to deselect an edge here and there, so looking at 3 edges on each side. Again, I'm going to use the bridge tool and click, and right now it's going to look probably a little bit on the chunky side here at this end, but that's not really going to matter because we're not really going to see this part anyway. We're going to put in a sphere here that will act as the shoulder end of our ball socket, and that will just plug right in. All right, so now with this ready, let's go ahead and quickly do the same thing on the lower part of the arm. So I'm going to switch my visibility here. And in this case, what I want to do is loop select this, again, shift in the close bracket, and shift up arrow until we get to, actually, right there may do it. But let's go up one more just to make sure we've got enough clearance. And then I'm going to press the open bracket to invert my selection, Control X to cut, and then we'll do the same thing that we've done on the other side here. So select the whole loop, deselect a couple of edges, and then bridge. And now we actually just have to take this piece here and pull it back into the arm. So we might need to do a little bit of work to get this in here. And I'm going to select these 2 pieces here as well. And just drag those back in. And again, as long as they're tucked in here, we're not even ever going to see them because the fusion object is going to cut away everything else. Now, as a side note, another thing that you could try here would be to use the fusion object and make it larger in order to cut off more. But in this case, I want to just do this a little bit more cleanly so that I don't have to worry about as much stuff with my fusion, and I can just have everything nice and uniform. All right, so there we have it. And let's also close up this end, which is going to be inside the sleeve, so we won't see it, but we want to make sure that it's nice and capped off. So again, we'll bridge, click, and now we're ready to go. We've got our 2 pieces, and we're ready to start setting up our fusion object. All right, so the first thing to do here is we're going to work in this fusion setup is to figure out what pieces need to go together in order to create our 2 fusion objects for the lower arm and the upper arm. So we're going to start here with our arm lower, which is going to be this mesh right here. And then what we want to do for this one, what I'm going to do is I want to have it set up so that the center part of the hinge is connected to the lower arm along with the pin that goes up through. So we'll need to have this section right here, which is the outer cut I can see in my items list. So I'm going to hide the center cut. And then this item here will be to round off the upper arm, so I don't need that one, so I'm going to go ahead and hide that as well. So what we have left here are the pieces that will cut off the top and the bottom of this chunk, and then also this one, which will just basically take off the open end and round it. But I'm going to do this one step at a time, so I'm going to hide this part first. And now let's take this piece here and this piece here, and I'm now going to create a fusion item out of that. So we'll click on New Fusion, make sure you're in the Fusion tab down here, and I'm going to call this Forearm 1. Or here, this is on the left side, so just to keep things nice, I'll make that Forearm L. Strip width, now you have a couple of options here. You can choose a percentage-based strip width, or you can choose an absolute strip width, which will give you just something in based off of millimeters. So I'm going to do a strip width in millimeters, and you can see here my grid space, this is a 20 millimeter grid. So if I zoom in a little bit farther here, there's a 5 millimeter grid, and I think 5 millimeters, maybe even a little bit bigger. So let's go back here, Forearm L. I'm going to make this, I'm going to start with just 5 millimeters. And we can always go back and adjust this, but it's something I want to keep in the ballpark as we get started. So now I'm going to go ahead and click on New Fusion with Selected Meshes. So when you do that, it's going to look a little funny here. So I'm going to go down here to my default on my viewport settings and turn on Model Fusion, which will allow me to actually see the result of the fusion. You can see we've got, right now, the two pieces just adding into each other. All right, which isn't what I want. We can also see they're a little bit off center. But first, let's go ahead and fix this up so that this is subtracting instead of adding to the arm piece. So we'll select this piece here. And then on the top of our fusion settings here, we have options for setting or changing mesh roles. And so we have a primary mesh, which is what we have both of them right now, where they'll just stick together. We have subtractive, and then we have intersections. So what I want to do is I want to set this one up to be a subtraction mesh. And at first, you'll notice it's just going to kind of disappear and look like nothing is happening. But that's okay, because we have to just assign it to subtract from this mesh. So with that selected, we shift click on the other mesh. And then here, if we jump down a couple spaces, we have trim and untrim. So now we'll just choose to trim the mesh that we had selected. So now we actually get that section cut out. Okay, all right, so now let's go ahead and hide this just so it cleans up our viewport a little bit. I'm going to leave the pin visible right now. It doesn't need to be made a fusion item or anything. We can just keep it. So let's go ahead and now we'll select our C here that's going to round things off. And now you can actually start to get an idea of how this is going to work. So we've got this, this section in here that's going to fit inside the other half of the arm. And then this is going to round it off so that when this part of the arm rotates around this pin, it doesn't clip and cut through the other part of the model. All right, so let's go ahead and now select this one, and I want to make this one a subtraction. So we'll click on subtraction, and then same thing here. I'm going to shift click on the arm, and then we click on trim, and now it has cut this out. Now something you might notice, and this is going to happen when you have things that are fairly closely aligned, is you can see that it's caused a little bit of kind of some weirdness with the overlap here. Right? So what I need to do is I need to go in and just slightly adjust the scaling of these two pieces right here that are subtracting. So I'm going to select both of those. I'm going to go to polygon mode. I'm going to set my selection action center to selection. And then I'm going to use the scale tool. And I'm just going to scale these out a little bit to where it cleans off that edge. And what we had was essentially the slight rounding of the sub Ds on this first subtraction overlapping with the subtraction of the second piece, so it just caused a little bit of roughness there. So I'm just scaling that up a little. I can actually probably drag that back even a little bit. All I'm looking for is for it to clean up that edge, and I don't need to go any farther. See, if you go too far, you'll start to get artifacts like this, and this is just where the fusion object isn't quite handling because I've got things very, very close together. But let's go back here. It looks like about 103%. Or so was working. Oops. So with that set to 103%, so just scaled up a tiny bit, you can see that is now working. Now, like I had said before, this is a little off-center, probably a little bit small, but I'm going to set up both halves of the object here so that we can see them together, and then we can scale our cutaway pieces, these fusion subtractions, all together, and we can get a better idea of how the two things are going to interact. So for now, I can go ahead and hide those two pieces, all right? And we can go ahead and bring in our upper arm. That's going to be this one right here. And we're going to start the same way here. So I've got, let's hide this fusion mesh item here for a minute. I can leave my lower arm still visible because it will just give me the wireframe, so it's not going to get in the way. But I'm going to hide the fusion item so I can see what's going on here a little better. So I'm going to start here with the center cut. All right, so I'm going to select that and the arm, the upper arm, and we'll do a new fusion item, and we'll call this upper arm L, and I'm going to leave the same 5mm strip width and go ahead and click and make a new fusion item. And now we've got to make this one a subtraction. So we select it, make it negative, select the arm, and trim it. And you can see now we've got the gap cut out of it, and that's good. And now we'll hide that one, and we'll bring in our C here. And this one we just need to select, make it a subtraction, and then select the arm and subtract it from that. Now you notice this one is working a little bit the same as the other one, but since it's in the middle, we actually look like we've got kind of it hollowed out, but it's got an end cap. But we're going to fix that in the same way here, just by grabbing this center cut item, and in polygons I'm just going to scale it out, something like that. Again, 103% seems to be adequate. We don't have any errors or anything like that. So now we can hide that item, and we've got the two pieces together. And now the last thing that we have to do here is to get this pin cut, which is this one right here. And we want to make that one subtractive. And then we want to select the arm and trim that. And now we can see that, if I hide that, we have the original pin, which is just the mesh item, in the way. But if we hide that, we see this goes all the way through. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take this pin here, and in polygon mode, I'm just going to scale it down to where it just kind of fits into the slot. Now you could scale that exactly, or you could make another fusion trim to do that, but I kind of like there being just a slightly different offset, as if this really is a pin that's been placed in. And at the end I would probably add a metallic texture to that to make it offset from plastic or whatever I'd be using for the arms. So with that, let's go ahead and bring back our forearm. And now you can see we've actually got these two fusion items all set up. And now from here, we can go ahead and make some adjustments to the overall shape here by just grabbing the group for the fusion hinge that I've used here. And in item mode, I can go ahead and scale this, and it will allow me to move things around and adjust them. So here, let's start and scale these out just a little bit. And, you know, at first I was going to take and move it all the way over here, but I actually think I kind of like the way that these two pieces kind of hit into each other. So it's the back side of the elbow, and what you would be looking at here, if this is something like a toy, this would be so that the hinge can't extend beyond here, so that the elbow can't bend backwards. So actually I think I kind of like that, and I think I'm going to leave it because I think that works fairly well. So the only thing that we have to worry about here is just doing a little bit of cleanup, because we've got some things going off just a little weird on our fusion items. So now I'll have to go into the individual items and just do a little bit of cleanup, because right here it looks like it's our lower arms. So let's go ahead and, or our forearms. So let's go ahead and hide the other. Yep, so we can see there's where our error is cropping up. And now we just have to decide where this error is. So it looks like it might be with the C cut. Perhaps. Let me see if I rotate this, and I want to make sure I rotate this around the pin. So I'm going to set my, I'm going to shift click and also select my pin here. So let's get the C2 and the pin, and then I'm going to go to polygon mode, and I'm going to select this whole piece here. And now I'm going to set my action center to element. And I had to have the pin mesh visible or selected so that I could actually select this vertex as my center point for rotation. I think I might just need to rotate this a little. Sometimes that will fix errors like that. Nope. So there's going to be a little bit of adjusting that goes here. So this offers you a lot of freedom and flexibility, but there also are some times where some cleanup is required to get exactly where you need to go. So I can also try scaling this out. So let's just scale just a little bit. And we're just keeping an eye on our little edges here. And I think this is actually getting better. So the next thing to do is to just change our quality here, because sometimes the quality of the fusion mesh can be the issue. So I'm going to select down here at the very bottom, and my fusion mesh is set to draft. I want to set that to airtight final. And that's actually looking pretty good. It could be a little bit more cleanup by moving things around, but I think I like the way that this is looking overall, so I don't want to overdo it. So let's go ahead and get that. I'm going to hide the pin, or everything but the pin rather, and we'll bring in that piece. And there we go. So now we have this actual mesh item here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this pin here, and I'm going to drag it out of the group here. So now it's on its own. So when I go to set this up as a finished mesh, when I take the fusion items out entirely, I will be able to just parent things to that pin, and then we'll rotate around the pin in order to get the rotation of the arm. And now one more thing that we're going to do with this, while we still have an active fusion mesh for the upper arm, is I want to go in and actually make this so that I have a shoulder socket here. And we're going to use a sphere for both the socket attached to the shoulder as well as cutting into the body. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my character folder here and bring the character back so that I can see where everything is. And now I'm going to bring and place a sphere just right in here. So let's go ahead and I'm going to create a new mesh item. And in that item, I'm going to create a sphere, and I'm going to use a quad ball sphere. I'm going to set this up to subdivision level of about 6. I'm just going to drag this out in the viewport here, right where the shoulder is. And I want to make sure that this is large enough to kind of encompass the shoulder area, but at the same time, I don't want it to be so large that it makes the shoulders look super bulky. I don't want them to look, anything weird. I want them to look, still kind of like shoulders. But, we're understanding that this is supposed to look like an action figure, so we do want it to have the feel of being functional. So I think something like that ought to be good. 85 millimeters in all axes here. And I think that ought to do it. So what I'll need to do here is now take and position this just a little bit better. Let's set my action center back to automatic, so that it kind of comes into the shoulder a bit. And what I'm looking for is just a little bit of separation all the way around, so that, there we go. So you can see we're getting sphere in between the arm joint and the body all the way around. And I could probably pull that down just a little bit more. Doesn't need to be a lot, but I just want a little bit of separation. That way when I subtract one of these spheres out from the body and then I attach it onto here, this two spheres will fit together very nicely. Okay, so I think that's going to do pretty well. Let's actually take it back. I'm going to scale it up just a tiny bit and just get it right there so I get plenty of room over that shoulder. And I want to kind of balance it, so something like that. All right, so let's go ahead now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create two versions of this. So I'm going to take this and just duplicate it. So duplicate, and on this one I'm going to call this shoulder, and this one I'm going to call shoulder socket. All right, so now that I have both of those pieces, I'm going to hide the socket just for now. We're going to deal with the body on its own in a moment, but let's now take the shoulder, and I'm going to go down to my Fusion tab. So let's go ahead and hide the character. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this item here, and then I'm also going to select my upper arm, so I know I've got the two pieces together. And I'm going to set my object here to a main object. So now you can see that those two blend together, but I've got a little bit of an issue here, and that's that the 5 millimeters worked very well down here, and actually it maybe need to shrink down just a little bit down there, but up here it's looking really tight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a kind of a global adjustment here to both of these fusion items. So I'm going to change my strip width. Let's go down to maybe 3 millimeters. And actually that even still might be a little bit high. Let's go down to 2 millimeters. I think I'll leave it at 3. But now this one is looking really too tight. And what I want is I want to get a little bit more of a smooth gradation between the sphere that's the shoulder and the rest of the arm. So what I'm going to do here is go down to my Fusion Strips setting here. And what I'll do is just click on Update Strip Items. All right, and now you can see that if I mouse over where the individual strips are, it lets me have some control over them. So let's go ahead and click that one. And now you can see that I have options for hauling and adjusting my strips. So if I have that selected and I click on this one, it's going to allow me to adjust my strip width. And now all I have to do is click and drag in the viewport here, and I can change my strip width. And I think something fairly big, maybe even 30 millimeters or so, it's actually going to work pretty well, because this we're looking more for a smooth transition and not so much just kind of a little bit of a rounded edge. I think that's going to work pretty well. But now that one has been adjusted while the rest of that arm has stayed at the lower strip width. Now before we move on to the main body of the character, there's one thing that I want to point out that has to do with the edges of your meshes that are not affected by mesh fusion. So by that it would be areas like the end of this arm here, and this is going to be where the sleeve terminates and the wrist of the character would essentially connect to the arm. Now what I would like to do here is I'd like to have a little bit of a crisper edge around here and also in this inside area. And normally what I would probably do if I was doing this with just a regular subdivision surface object would be to use some edge weighting. But it's important to know that edge weighting actually does not work, or is not respected rather, with mesh fusion. So if I go ahead and just select my actual mesh here for the lower arm, and I just go to edge mode and I get this edge, what I'd probably do would be sharpen up this edge, and this edge, which is actually a number of edges that make up the inside there. All right, so if I were to take these and just press Shift W and turn on my weight tool, and let's real quickly go over here and see we're on a subdivision level of 2. So if I put this up to 20, it should be completely crisp. But if I go here and click, you can see that my underlying mesh does become completely sharp at those points, but the mesh fusion object, which is what we're going to end up actually seeing at the end, is not. So what we'll need to do here is actually let's go ahead and undo that, is we'll have to do the same thing just with adding edge loops. So I'm going to select a couple of polygons here, Alt-C for the loop slice, set the count to 2, mode to symmetry, and just kind of drag this out a little bit. And I'll do the same thing here, except we don't need this extra one, so I'm just going to get rid of it. And now you can see I've added in essentially 3 loops, one at the bottom and the top of this inner ring, and then one up here close to the sleeve there. And that has successfully kind of shored up this ending of the arm here so that it doesn't look so blobby. But just to note, you can't do that with edge weighting on an object that is already going to be using mesh fusion, because those edge weights will be ignored on the finished fusion object. And that also is going to be important if you need to go in and add any additional edge detail to any of the subtractive joints or anything like that on the inside of here, because that's not going to work if you're trying to use edge weighting. You just have to go ahead and do the same thing with actual loop slices to add in extra support edges to tighten up your subdivision surfaces. All right, so with that part fixed up there at the bottom, I would say that this is looking pretty much ready here. And I'm going to go ahead and hide my extra mesh items so that I can just see this, and I'd say that everything looks pretty good there. We've got nice seams, we've got everything working well around this pin, and I think everything is ready to go here. So now we can go ahead and look at the main body. So what I'm going to do here is open up the character and bring in the character mesh. And let's go ahead and just select the main character. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to copy the entire base model here of the character, and let's close this up. And I'm just going to make a new mesh item, which we will call Fusion Body. And I'll go ahead and paste those polygons into there, and then we can hide the rest of the character. So what I'm looking for here is I want to be able to do something similar at the hip that I'm doing with the shoulder. So I want to kind of cut off the legs here at a certain point. I also want to remove the arms anywhere past this ball socket that's going to be the shoulder. And then I'm going to have to go in and close up the areas in the neck, the open areas that will be left in the arms, and the open areas that will be left on the legs, so that I can actually have a solid airtight piece of geometry to work with Mesh Fusion in. All right, now just a note here, if we look under hips, I've got a pre-built socket set up here. So it's essentially the same kind of thing that we did on the elbow, except it's just done with two pieces, so that there's an inner and an outer disc, and then there is a top and a bottom kind of clipping piece. So I'll want to make sure that my Mesh Fusion loop here goes down into the this disc, which right now looks a little on the high side on the outside, but I think it should be all right. So let's go ahead and just cut that out. And for the sake of just getting this set up, I'm going to turn symmetry on. So let's go ahead and loop and cut, and then double click and cut that. And then we'll do the same kind of thing here at the shoulders. Now we're going to end up doing some symmetry with this after the fact, so it's not going to matter if everything is exactly symmetrical, especially once we start working in the Mesh Fusion. But just for now, just to keep things a little bit more clean, I'm going to go ahead and make the rest of the body symmetrical. I think something like that ought to work. All right, so let's go ahead and look here at the hips then, at the bottom of these legs. And I just want to see that this is falling down, and let's go ahead and just straighten it out. Actually, I'll use Edge Extend. Just pull that down a little bit, because we're also going to cap that off, and it will get rounded a bit when we do that. So I don't want this to be too high. But this should be fine there. All right, so now let's go ahead and hide the hips. And now all we have to do, let's go ahead and hide the arms as well, and that pin for the elbow. Now all we have to do is close up these pieces. So I'm going to start just up here on the shoulders, and I'm just going to select and then deselect a couple of pieces, so I have 3 edges and 3 edges. And then we have 2 options. We could either go up to Edge and choose Fill Quads, although right now we have everything selected in such a way that the Fill Quads won't help us that much. But I'm going to go ahead and just use my Bridge tool, and we'll just click that, and it's closed. And you may want to, at certain points here, check your shoulder socket and make sure that everything's working. Looks fine, so we'll just keep that. And then I'm going to close up the top of the collar here, and on this one, I'm going to go ahead and use Fill Quads. I'm going to turn on Fill with a Grid Pattern and click OK. And you can see that came out a little bit twisted. So this is not going to be the best option here. But just know that this is an option that you have, the under Edges Fill Quads, if you have an open area. Sometimes this will work very well. Right now I want something that's symmetrical, and this is not. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. And we can see that we have 12 edges selected. So if I deselect a couple of edges there and a couple of edges there, we should be able to bridge across this fairly easily. So let's go ahead and just choose Bridge, and we'll turn on Auto Connection, and that filled that out pretty nicely. Now it's nice and symmetrical. But if you get some areas, it can be very useful to just use that Fill Quads. So here, let's go ahead and try that down here since we're here. Go ahead, Edge, Fill Quads, and click OK. And actually, that worked perfectly well, except I turned my symmetry off. So let's go ahead and turn symmetry back on, double click, Fill Quads, make sure Grid Pattern is turned on, and there we go, we're all set. So that quickly, now we've got our base mesh for the body all set up and ready to go. Now what I want to do here is I want to also bring in the head, because this is going to attach to the body, and it's also going to have some Mesh Fusion going on with it so that we can have a separation with the neck to the top or the rest of the head. So let's go ahead and copy that. Then we'll go ahead and hide our character folder. And we'll get a new mesh item here. We'll call this Fusion Head. And then we'll just paste this in. And I just want to see that the neck sits comfortably down in there, and I think that looks all right. So that should be should be totally fine. All right, so now moving on, all we have to do really is start connecting these pieces together. And we're actually going to need two versions of the head. We're going to need one that will use the neck, and we're going to use a second one that will be with the head. So we'll just go ahead and hide that for the moment, but we'll get back to that here in a second, because we're going to go ahead and attach the neck right into the collar of the shirt here, and then it will have something like a little ball joint that you would see on a typical action figure where you could pop the head on and off. And that also makes it cool if we have some different geometry that we would like to plug in for the head itself. We could actually just copy and paste it into our base mesh, and then we can change out the head without having to do a whole lot of work. All right, so let's go ahead, and I'm going to start here with the shoulder socket. And let's go ahead here, and what I'm going to do is let's start just by subtracting this. So I'm going to get the shoulder socket, which I'll drag down here, and I'm just going to shift click on the fusion body. We'll go down to fusion, new fusion, and we can leave everything as is, I think, for now. And we'll call this one main body. Okay, and new fusion. All right, so right now we have, of course, a shoulder socket that is adding, and we don't want that, so we'll go to the socket. We'll set it to a subtraction, and we shift click on the body and click our trim button, and there we've got that, so we can hide the socket. And if we want now, we could also bring in the arm just to see how that fits, and I think that works really well. Now I may want to add at some point a secondary piece that overlaps the top here to kind of be like some shoulder padding on the character or something, but for now I think this works very well. What I am going to do though is take this and adjust my strips, because that looks a little on the tight side there, and what I would like to do is change this strip width, maybe just double it. Let's go up to 10 millimeters, and actually I think that works pretty well. So I want the feeling there is a little bit of rounding there. Okay, and now the other thing that I'm noticing here is that the fitting looks just a tiny bit on the tight side to me. So what I'm going to do here is bring that shoulder socket back, and then we're just going to scale it up just by 0.5%. So I'm going to click on the equal sign here on the scale tool, and then just nudge that up one step, and it's just made that socket a tiny bit bigger, and that way we get a little bit more fitting edge there. So it looks like there's just a tiny bit of space when we get in very close. And out here, if we're doing renders of this, that's just going to help with the readability and keeping the shadows nice and clean. All right, so that's that. Let's go ahead and look at the same thing down here with the hips. So I'm going to bring in the hips, and we can see here that I've got this one here, which will be my subtractive piece, and this one along with this one will both subtract from the body, whereas this one and the inside one, which I may not be able to get to from this angle, will be subtracting from the leg itself. All right, so let's go ahead here, and I'm going to take this piece and just make sure that they're together up here, and then we're going to hide that one. And now all we have to do is take these two and then select the main body. We'll set these to negative, and then we shift click on the body and set the trim. And we may end up with a little bit of things not working quite right at first. And typically when you get this kind of thing, it's just because there is something a little bit too close with your vertices on your base mesh, and it will cause these holes. So right now you can see I've got this jagged edge all the way around here. So just to make this easier in the troubleshooting diagnostic areas, I'm going to get rid of the whole the character's right-hand side here because we don't need those anyway. We're going to end up doing symmetry after the fact. So I'm just going to take these two groups of polygons and cut them out. And now I'm going to go ahead and hide one of these and just work with these one at a time. So if I take this one and move it up just a little bit, We should see what we're going for here. So basically the idea behind this C here is just to give us a rounded kind of bottom edge here where the two pieces of the leg, or the leg and the hip rather, will come together. And right now, since we're getting a little bit of overlapping with this part of the body, that's where we're actually getting our issue here. So what I'm going to do is bring this one back, and let's make sure that we have both of these guys selected. And now I'm going to turn on my rotate tool, but I'm going to set my action center to element. And then what I'm going to do is go in right to the center of, oops, that's not the center. We're going to go right to the center of the disc piece, and then we're just going to rotate this one back a little bit. And you can see as soon as I get it out of the way, we actually get everything working properly. And it's just because we had a tiny bit of overlap in here with the center part of the legs, and that was what was causing our issue. So there we go. That quickly we've got that fixed. So now we can take and hide those two mesh items, and we can see that we should have everything looking pretty good there. All right, so, whoops, except we see one little spot down here where we have a little bit of overlap, and that's just because the base part of the character here is sitting a little bit below that fusion mesh. So let's just take these parts, change my action center to selection, and I'll just pull them up just a tiny bit. There we go. And now we don't have that overlap, so we don't have that little floating polygonal island there. All right, so the last thing that we're going to do with the main body here actually is to attach the neck. So what I'm going to do is go to the fusion head mesh that we have, and I'm going to take it, and let's, before we do anything, we're going to duplicate it. And let's change this one to fusion neck. Click OK. Now I can hide the one that's the head. It's a duplicate at the moment. But what we're going to do is we're going to create a little bit of a ball joint right here in the neck, and then that will expand outwards, and it will encompass the entire head, but leave us a nice flat edge at the base of what will be the rotating part of the neck. So in order to do that, we're going to need a new mesh item, which I'll create there. And now we're going to go in here and just create a simple sphere. We'll start with just the ball part of the ball joint, and then we will extend downward from there and then outward to make the entire subtracted piece here. So let's go ahead and set my X to 0, and let's put these all even. So we're at 17 millimeters. We're going to make this a globe. We need more sides than that though, so let's go up to 12. Maybe even up to 16. Just I want this to have a nice shape. This is going to be almost always entirely invisible, but I want it to be clean when it is visible, so we're going to make it fairly clean here. I think something like that, except maybe just a little bit bigger, so let's just nudge this guy up to 20 millimeters. And I think that'll work. All right, so now what we're going to do here is I'm going to take this sphere, and let's hide our neck piece here. And just to keep things clean, I could go in and make this all quads at the top. I'm not going to do it because this is not 100% necessary, but just know if you want to keep everything all quads, if you just go in and select and delete every other edge just around the center cap here, it will create all quads there. Now, I'm not going to have to worry about it at the bottom because this is where we're actually going to be getting the protruding part of this that will make our joints. So let's select up to there and cut those out. And then I'm just going to grab this bottom edge, and we'll go ahead and bring our neck back here so I can see how this is lying. And actually here, before I do that, let's go ahead and rotate this. Now I could have it completely vertical like it is, but I'm going to let it tilt with the head. That way if we did choose to rotate the head around this neck, he'll kind of look up as you look to the left or right, and then he'll be just looking straight ahead if you have it here. If you have it rotated flat, so that this bottom part edge is flat, then the head will just move linear left to right. You know, choice you can make as you work on the design here. So let's go ahead and select this edge now, and I'm going to use edge extend, and I'm just going to pull this down, say to about right there. I want to keep it above the collar. That's the only thing I'm worrying about here. And actually I might want to move the whole thing up here, so let's go ahead and select this whole thing, just slide it up a little bit. It'll give me a little bit more room to play with here, so I can edge extend just down a little bit more. Okay, and now I'm going to edge extend one more time, and I'm going to go to the scale tool, and what I'm going to do is just pull this whole thing out on this plane. All right, so this is going to be essentially the cutting plane where we separate the base of the neck that's attached to the body from the rest of the neck that attaches to the head. So let's go ahead and take that, and then I'll edge extend again. Edge extend again, and this time we'll pull it up just a little bit. And then we'll do it again, and we'll pull up more. This time we'll scale outwards, because I want to keep the whole head inside of this, this piece here. Now, I may need to adjust some of these other edges as I go, but we're just looking at making basically something like a balloon over the character's head here. So let's go ahead and do this. Edge extend again. We'll pull up, and it looks like we might be home free now. So let's go ahead and just do one more edge extend that will pull up over the top of the head. And now all I have to do is go ahead and cap this off. So let's go ahead and drop that tool, go to Edge, Fill Quads, click OK. And it really doesn't matter what my grid pattern does, but that looks all right, so we should be okay. Let's go ahead and hide the fusion neck for a moment so we can see this. And that looks good. So now all I need to do is select the polygons, flip them, and we have essentially our piece that we're going to work with. Now, I want this to be a little bit more flush down here, so I'm going to add a couple of loop slices fairly tight so that we get a nice kind of flat edge there. And then on the inside loop here, let's also do that right down here, just so we get a nice kind of clean connecting joint. So what we'll do here is on this one, let's call this neck sub. This is what's going to be subtracting, and then I'm going to duplicate it because we're also going to have one that will be a fusion union with the rest of the head. So let's call this neck union, and we'll go ahead and hide the union. We'll bring back the neck sub, bring back the fusion neck, and what we'll do first here is I'm going to take the neck and attach it to the rest of the body. So let's just control click on the body, go down to fusion, and we'll just click there. And looks like the way that we have this overlapping in here is what's causing our problem. So we will just take everything in here. It's going to be all that, and that, and that, and that. And we're just going to scale this in just a little bit, because it looks like we're just getting a little close to some of the vertices in the actual collar. Oh, there we go. We had it and then we lost it. So even though Fusion has gotten much better in the way it deals with this stuff, there are going to be still times when you get some weird errors like that, and really it's just going to be the alignment of the pieces. And actually right there, I think that that actually works pretty darn well. So now what we can do is I can take our neck subtraction and this part here, and let's go ahead and make that a subtractive item, and then we will shift click on the head and click trim, and now we'll just be left with the basically the neck attached to the body there. All right, so as the last piece that we have here, we'll go ahead and do the union of the head with the same piece there, and then we'll be ready to go. Because the knee down here is essentially the exact same thing as the elbow, so we don't need to go into that really in any detail. All right, so let's go ahead here, and I'm going to grab my fusion head and my neck union. Let's just keep those two together. And we'll make a new fusion object, which we'll call character head 1. And I'm going to call it character head 1 because we could easily swap in a different head, and it's not going to be very difficult at all. We'll go ahead and click new fusion meshes. And now at the moment, these are just joined together, which doesn't give us what we want. What we want is the union of the two. So I'm going to go ahead and take the head item here, and we're going to use the intersect trim, and then we'll shift click on the neck union piece there. We'll click trim, and what we should see now is that, yep, the neck aligns with the rest of it. I think maybe my my strips need to be adjusted a little bit. They're a little on the loose side there around the neck, but that gives you the basic idea. So now we've pretty much got everything done, and we've covered all the topics that we're going to, except the fact that now our body does need to be mirrored, because you can see we only have our subtractive elements on the character's left-hand side. So what we'll do here is we'll take the main body, and I'm going to set my mesh mode up to airtight final. And then we're going to choose dupe and convert to mesh, which means it's going to leave my fusion object and it's going to hide it, but it's going to create a mesh now that will take the place of it, so that we can actually see that. So we want to choose duplicate original and create mesh. And now we have our entire character just in a regular mesh item. You can see my fusion item is hidden. And we can also do that with the arms here once we have everything the way that we want it. And now, just to finish this off, all we'll need to do is go into our mesh operators here, and we can choose add operator, and I'm just going to type in sim, and we get symmetrize. Click OK. And there we go. Now, if by chance you choose symmetrize and it goes to having solid on both sides, all you have to do is choose the positive to negative and change it from negative to positive. Now you can see this way it's mirroring from his right to over to his left. If we change this back to positive to negative, it mirrors that way. And now you can just leave this here this way, or you could take and also freeze the mesh from this point on. All right, so now skipping ahead just a little bit, I've gone ahead and following the same procedure as we did with the arm and the shoulder, taken off the leg here. All right, as you can see, it's been closed off just very simply with the bridge tool across the top. And then the same thing going on here with around the knee, where we've got the lower leg, which goes up just above the knee, and the upper leg, which comes down just below the knee. And then we'll have to adjust these a little bit as we go to make sure that they all fit into the fusion objects, but we'll go ahead and do that right now. So now if we bring this back here, we've got the fusion hinge, which is aligned with the knee. All right, and then we have the remainder of the hips, which is aligned with the top of the leg. But if we come around to this side, you can see that there's a little bit of an issue, and that's that our fusion objects here in the hip section don't fully overlap the actual hip mesh, right, where the leg meets the hip here. So what we'll have to do is just make some really minor adjustments. So what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to just select a loop of polygons around here, so press the L key, and then shift in the closed bracket key will give me the rest of the mesh, and select everything else there, so that now I can just use the move tool and pull that out a little bit. And let's go ahead and bring our upper leg back in to make sure that that works. And that should be enough. Maybe we'll just give it a little extra padding just to make sure. And then we'll move into the other part here that rounds off the top of the joint. Again, press the L key after selecting a couple of polygons, shift in the closed bracket, and we can close off that selection and then do the same thing here where we pull that out. All right, so now we have everything that we need to actually start pulling apart this mesh the same way that we did with the shoulder and the elbow. All right, so what we'll do then is let's start with the top part of the hip here. So I'm going to hide this fusion hinge that has my knee section, and we're just going to start up here. So I'm going to start by selecting these three meshes, and we'll create a new fusion hinge, which we'll call upper leg. I'm going to leave my strip width at 5 millimeters, so all the same kind of stuff that we had done before, and create a new fusion item. All right, so of course by default these have all been added together, which isn't what we want. So the next thing that we'll need to do is select one piece that's a subtraction, change it to a subtraction, and then shift click on the rest of the leg and click on our trim button. Now we can see we've removed out that section. We'll do the same thing here. So select the object, turn it into a subtraction, shift click on what we want to subtract from, and click the trim button again. So just like we had when we get these tight overlapping areas in previous sections, we've got this little bit of kind of space in between here. So all we need to do is just select this item here, use our scale tool, and just scale it up a tiny bit. And we want to make sure that we scale it enough to where we don't get those overlapping sections, but at the same time we want to make sure that we're also not getting the mesh breaking where we get those jagged edges. So it's a good idea to have a quick look around and make sure that all works. In this case that looks good, so I'm going to hide the whole hips section here, and now what we should be able to see if we select a different mesh is we should see that working just right. Okay, so let's move on then to the knee section here. So I'm going to bring this fusion item back here. And we've got a few things that need to happen here. So we need to create the knee itself. And so we've got to subtract out the sides, and then we've got to round off the bottom and then subtract out the pin. So for the moment, we don't need this one, so I'm going to hide it. And then I want to leave the outside portion of the knee on the upper side, and I want the kneecap to be included on the lower side. So what we're going to do is we'll get our center cut, and we'll make that visible, and we'll hide our outer cut. Okay, so now we'll be subtracting out of the center of the knee, and then we'll also be cutting out this pin. So we can do this just the same way that we did with the hip, and since we already have our fusion items set up, we can go and start adding these in. Now I'm going to do these one at a time because I find that very often you can bypass some errors, and sometimes you can do things multiple pieces at once, but the problem is if you run into an error, it's harder to diagnose where that actual error is. All right, so let's get this one now. I already did the rounding off at the bottom of the knee. Now we're subtracting out the center here, and then we'll do the same thing with our pin cut. Make it a subtraction, shift click on the leg, and trim. All right, and now I'm going to hide the actual pin that's going to be in there. But right now we just need to look and see how this is going. You can see that right now this actually isn't lining up properly. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to select all of these pieces here. And we can move them around now, but sometimes this will lead to errors. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to hide everything here. I'm going to bring back what I'm going to cut off of the lower leg, and I'm actually going to complete both of these fusion items, and then I can transform all of the pieces at one time, and I can see how the cuts are going to affect everything in real time. But before I move on to that, actually, I take it back. There's one thing that's looking a little bit off here, and it's that this center cut it needs to be scaled out just a little bit because we've got that overlapping issue that we get pretty often here. So let's go to a selection action center. And I'm just going to scale that out just a tiny bit. That's too far. Something like that ought to work. And I may need to adjust scale a little bit too after I align everything, but we'll do that in a moment. All right, so now we'll go ahead and hide that again. We'll bring back those two cuts. And now we're going to have these two pieces selected along with the lower leg, which I will control click so we get all three of them. We're going to create a new fusion item, which we'll call lower leg. And we'll click new fusion from there. And now, again, just same procedure here. So, you know, at risk of repeating myself, we're going to be repeating ourselves here a bunch because really it's the same procedure kind of over and over. And once you get used to it, it's pretty easy. But it's a good idea to make sure that you actually have everything down. So repeating the process is definitely not a big deal because it is something that you'll do when you're working in production. All right, so there we go. That's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and bring the pin back in here, which we'll have to scale just a little bit. But we can see that this is looking okay, but just not quite right. So what I'm going to do, I have two options here actually. And the first thing that I'm going to do actually before we do this, let's hide the upper leg. And yeah, we got to make our kind of now customary adjustments to the scale of this piece so we don't get the little overlapping chunks. Something like that ought to work. And now I'm going to make sure that I'm in item mode. And I'm going to bring back the upper leg, so we have both pieces here. And now I'm going to select all of these pieces, including the pin that isn't going to be a fusion item, but we want it to still move around with everything else. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to just rotate it slightly so that it aligns with the knee a bit better, making sure that I don't go so far that I get the errors. And actually, I think that's probably going to work. I may want to scale it or move it actually just over a little bit to kind of center it up. Where the cuts go, but what I want to see is I don't want the knee to hyperextend. So having this part where these two pieces kind of butt up against each other is going to be good. And then in the back we don't have that, so we can actually get the rotation can go backwards. Okay, so that works. Now let's go ahead and hide these two pieces, and I'm just going to scale in our pin so that it fits into this section just a little bit better, and something like that. And there we go. We're all ready to go. So the last steps that you'll have to do in order to get this completely finished up, let me go ahead and hide some things so that we don't have them in the way. I'm going to hide our regular mesh items. But what you'll have to do here is, if I just let's bring back the head and the main body that has the procedural mirroring on it, and our arms there, and then I'm going to go into our actual character model here. Let's bring this back, but I don't need the character, and I don't need the head or the backpack or any of that stuff. I do need the hands, and really that's about it. And where's our pin? There's our pin for the elbow. So now all we need to do is take each of these fusion items and we'll freeze them. So just so you can see the procedure, we select an item and we go down and make sure that its mode is set to airtight final, and then we click dupe and convert to mesh. And once we do that, it will save our fusion mesh, it will hide it, and it will create a just regular mesh in its place. So here we can just do that one time just to make sure we've got the process down. Dupe and convert to mesh, create mesh, and now we've got just an actual mesh. So we can go through, do that with all of these pieces, and then once those are done, we can duplicate over, mirror the pieces over to the other side for the legs and the arms. We've already got the hands, and this model will be ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll skip ahead where we can see a completed version that has all the pieces put together. So here is a version of the character without the extra gear, and then here he is on the left with the helmet and the backpack and the gloves and everything put on. So there you go. You can see that using all of your different modeling techniques in conjunction with each other, and then stepping aside to do some simple troubleshooting every now and then when the mesh fusion sometimes appears that it doesn't work at all. When we get those big jagged edges or things like that, usually it's something needs to be moved a couple of millimeters or rotated a few degrees, and you end up with something that works and is very nice. You can now take all of the pieces of this character, break them apart individually for 3D printing or manufacturing, so that you could have in the end something that you could assemble and put together completely and physically. So that does it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.